My sister-in-law Sarah and I had a babysitting arrangement that worked perfectly. We started it back in March 2020 when the pandemic screwed everyone's lives over. She'd watch my kids 3 days a week, and I'd watch hers 3 days. No money exchanged hands, no drama, no bullshit. It was a win-win. And for 3 solid years, we kept it running smoothly. If something came up, we'd give each other plenty of notice, like mature adults. Then Sarah decided to throw all that out the fucking window over one stupid argument. A couple of weeks ago, we had this petty disagreement. I can't even remember what it was about. It was that insignificant. But apparently, Sarah took it personally. I figured she'd cool off after a day, so I didn't dwell on it. The next morning, I dropped my kids off at her place like I'd done 100 times before. I didn't even go inside. That wasn't unusual for us. If one of us was in a rush or just not feeling social, we'd stay in the car, let the kids go inside, and drive off once the door opened. I didn't think twice about it. I waved at her door when I saw it open, and then I headed to work. My commute is about 40 minutes, so I just zoned out to music, totally unaware that shit was about to hit the fan. When I finally got to work and checked my phone, my stomach dropped. I had 20 missed calls and a ton of texts, all from Sarah. The text started off with her saying she wasn't watching my kids that day because of our argument. Then the tone shifted to her bitching about me ignoring her. The last few messages were her threatening to call the police if I didn't pick up my kids within 45 minutes. I couldn't believe what I was reading. I called her immediately, apologizing for not seeing her messages sooner. I explained that my phone was on silent while I drove. You know, because I'm not a moron who texts and drives. I told her I'd leave work early and come get the kids, but she cut me off. "You've got 45 minutes, or I'm calling the cops," she said, all smug like she thought she was doing me a favor. I was speechless. Who the hell calls the cops on their own family? I work with kids for a living. If anything about child abandonment ended up on my record, my career would be over. Sarah knew this, and she still pulled this shit, Bill. I told her I'd leave as soon as I could, but I had to wrap up a few things at work first. My boss was understanding, but even with her support, I couldn't just drop everything immediately. By the time I got back to Sarah's place, it was just over an hour later. 2 squad cars were parked in front of Sarah's place, lights flashing, and my kids were standing on the porch looking scared out of their minds. I wanted to throw up. Sarah was standing there talking to the officers like she was the damn victim in all this, acting all righteous and smug. I got out of my car, took a deep breath, and approached them. My first thought was to yell at Sarah right there in front of everyone, but I knew I couldn't. So I turned to the cops and tried to explain what had happened. "There's been a misunderstanding," I told them. "I didn't abandon my kids. I dropped them off here this morning like I've done 100 times before, but I didn't see her message saying she couldn't watch them until I was already at work." One of the officers looked at me like he'd heard this story a million times before. "You didn't see her messages?" he asked, skeptical. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I was driving, and my phone was on silent. I called her back as soon as I saw the messages and told her I was on my way. I got here as fast as I could." Sarah, of course, had to chime in. "I told you I couldn't watch them today," she snapped. "You should have checked your phone before leaving them here. This is on you." I could feel my blood boiling, but I kept it together. "I didn't see the text, Sarah. That's not an excuse to call the cops on me. You know I work with kids. Do you have any idea what this could have done to me?" She just shrugged, like it was no big deal. The cops looked between us like they didn't want to be involved in our family drama. One of them finally said, "All right, this sounds like a communication issue. There's no crime here, so we're not filing any reports. Just make sure this doesn't happen again." They left, and I grabbed my kids and put them in the car. I didn't even look at Sarah as I walked back to my car, but she just had to get the last word in. "Maybe next time you'll check your phone," she yelled after me. "This was your fault, not mine." I didn't respond. I couldn't. If I'd said anything, it would have been a string of words that would have probably made me look like the crazy one. Instead, I slammed the car door, drove home, and spent the rest of the day trying to calm the fuck down. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head. The cops, the smug look on Sarah's face. my kids looking terrified on that porch. The fact that I even had to explain myself to the police. It made my blood boil all over again. She knew what she was doing. She knew exactly how much was at stake for me, and she did it anyway. A few days later, Sarah had the audacity to text me. She said, and I quote, "I think I might have overreacted. Can we go back to the old babysitting schedule?" I stared at the message for a good 5 minutes, trying to decide if I was going to respond or just block her outright. In the end, I decided she needed to hear exactly what I thought. "No, Sarah," I replied. "We're not going back to anything. You called the cops on me, on your own family. You knew what that could have done to me, and you didn't give a fuck. So no, I'm not babysitting your kids ever again. Figure it out," she replied almost immediately, trying to twist it back on me. "If you'd checked your phone or spoken to me when you dropped them off, none of this would have happened," she wrote. "I warned you. I would have handled it differently if I were in your position." I couldn't believe the nerve of this woman. "You're out of your fucking mind if you think this is my fault," I shot back. "You crossed a line and I'm done with you." She kept texting, trying to guilt me into forgiving her, but I didn't reply. I blocked her number and figured that'd be the end of it. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. A few days later, my brother Mike called me. Now, Mike's usually a chill guy, but when it comes to Sarah, he's whipped as hell. He started off by saying he just wanted to talk, but it quickly turned into him yelling at me. "Why can't you just let this go?" he said. Sarah apologized. She knows she went too far. We're family. You're really going to let one mistake ruin everything? One mistake? I snapped. "Mike, she called the fucking cops on me. Do you understand what could have happened if the cops hadn't believed me? My career would have been over. She knew that and didn't give a shit." "She was pissed," he said. Like that made it okay. "You're really going to hold a grudge over this? You're screwing us over, man. Sarah had to quit her job because we can't afford childcare now. Do you even care what this is doing to us?" "Not my problem," I told him. "You guys made your bed. Now lie in it." Mike went off, calling me selfish, saying I was tearing the family apart. I told him to fuck off and hung up on him. Then my mom called, and I knew I was in for another round of guilt tripping. Sure enough, she started with, "You're being unreasonable. Sarah apologized. Why can't you just forgive her?" "Because this isn't about an apology, Mom," I said. "She didn't just screw me over. She put my entire career at risk. And now you're trying to make me feel bad because she's dealing with the consequences of her actions? Number, I'm done." Of course she didn't get it. She said I was being childish and needed to think about how this was affecting the family. I told her I was thinking about the family. My own family. My kids. Myself. Not Sarah and Mike. And with that, I ended the call. Sarah calling the cops on me was bad enough, but the fallout from that decision was about to ripple through the entire family in ways none of us saw coming. I thought things couldn't get any worse after Sarah called the cops on me, and Mike blew up my phone with his guilt-tripping bullshit. But apparently, I underestimated just how selfish and entitled these two could be. The real kicker came when my mom started paying the price, literally and figuratively, for their irresponsibility. After Sarah quit her job, she dumped her kids on my mom, who apparently decided it was her job to fix the mess. At first, I didn't care. My mom had been defending Sarah, saying I was overreacting, so I figured she'd learn her lesson once Sarah pulled her usual crap on her. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. My mom started looking more and more exhausted every time I saw her. She complained about being tired but wouldn't directly say she was overwhelmed. I knew she was trying to hold it together, but it was obvious that babysitting Sarah's kids 3 days a week was draining her. Then one day, I got a call at work. It was my mom, and she sounded like shit. She was out of breath, saying she didn't feel well. My stomach sank immediately. I told her to stay put and rushed over to her place. When I got there, she looked pale and weak, sitting on the couch like she could barely hold herself up. I asked her what was wrong, and she said her chest felt tight and she had a headache that wouldn't go away. I wasn't about to take any chances, so I took her to the doctor. Turns out her blood pressure was sky high, dangerously high. The doctor said she needed to rest and avoid stress. Of course, I knew exactly what was causing her stress: Sarah and her kids. But even after hearing this, My mom refused to blame Sarah outright. "They're my grandkids," she said when I brought it up. "I can't just stop helping." "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Helping is one thing. Letting them walk all over you is another. You're not responsible for their kids. That's Sarah and Mike's job." She sighed but didn't say anything. I could tell she wasn't ready to stand up to them yet, but I sure as hell was. The next time Sarah came by to drop off her kids, I happened to be at my mom's place. I wasn't planning on being there, but I'd swung by to check on her, and Sarah showed up, all smiles, acting like she wasn't dumping her problems on a sick woman. "Hi, Mom," she chirped, ushering her kids inside. "I'll be back around 6. I stepped in before my mom could say anything. "Actually, no, you won't," I said, crossing my arms. Sarah froze and looked at me like I'd just slapped her. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone immediately defensive. "I mean, you're not leaving your kids here anymore," I said. "Mom just got out of the fucking doctor's office because of her blood pressure, and the last thing she needs is to babysit your kids while you sit on your ass all day." Sarah's face turned red. "I'm not sitting on my ass," she snapped. "I'm handling things at home while Mike works. Do you know how hard it is to manage everything?" "Yeah, I do," I shot back. "And guess what? It's your responsibility, not Mom's. Not mine, yours. Figure it the fuck out." My mom tried to intervene, of course. "Ashley, that's enough. We can talk about this later." "No, Mom, we can't," I said, turning to her. "You've been bending over backward for them. And look where it's gotten you, at the doctor's office. It's time to stop." Sarah, meanwhile, was fuming. "You don't get to decide that," she hissed. "This is between me and Mom." "Like hell it is," I said. "You're putting her health at risk because you and Mike can't get your shit together. I'm not letting this continue." She stormed out with her kids, muttering under her breath about how I was ruining everything. I didn't care. If she thought she could guilt me into backing down, she was dead wrong. For a while, I thought maybe that confrontation would be the wake-up call Sarah needed. But nope. The very next week, she dropped her kids off at my mom's house again, as if nothing had happened. My mom called me later that day, apologizing for not standing up to Sarah. "I just don't know how to say no to her," she admitted. "She always makes me feel guilty." "Mom," I said, trying not to lose my temper, "you have to stop letting her manipulate you. She's not going to stop until you put your foot down." "I know," she said quietly. "But what about the kids? They didn't ask for any of this. And they're not your responsibility," I reminded her. "You can love them without letting their mom walk all over you." The breaking point came a week later, when my mom ended up back in the hospital. Her blood pressure had spiked again, and this time, the doctor warned her that she needed to make serious changes or risk a stroke. Seeing her like that, hooked up to monitors, looking so fragile, broke something in me. When Mike showed up to pick up Sarah's kids, I couldn't hold back anymore. I confronted him right there in the hospital. "You and Sarah are killing Mom," I told him bluntly. "If you leave your kids with her again, I swear to God, I'll call the cops myself." "Don't be ridiculous," he said, rolling his eyes. "She loves watching them. She wants to help." "Bullshit," I snapped. "She's too nice to say no, and you're taking advantage of that. You're putting her health at risk because you and Sarah can't figure out how to parent your own damn kids." Mike didn't like that one bit. He started yelling about how I was being dramatic and making things harder for everyone. I told him I didn't give a fuck. If they couldn't handle their shit, that was on them. Not me, and definitely not my mom. Later that night, I sat down with my mom and told her she had to stop babysitting. "I love you, Mom, but this has to end," I said. "You've done more than enough. It's time to put yourself first." She cried, of course. She hated feeling like she was letting anyone down, even people who didn't deserve her kindness. But I think the second hospital visit finally drove the point home. She agreed to tell Sarah and Mike that she couldn't babysit anymore. Even though I knew it was going to be a battle, Sarah and Mike weren't going to like it. But I didn't care. They needed to start taking responsibility for their own damn lives, whether they liked it or not. You'd think Sarah and Mike would get the hint after my mom's trip to the hospital, but nope. These two just kept doubling down on their entitlement. When my mom finally told them she couldn't babysit anymore, they acted like she'd just betrayed them. Sarah had a meltdown, crying about how hard it was for her to manage everything and saying my mom promised to help. Mike, as usual, took the passive-aggressive route. He called me up, furious, trying to pin the whole thing on me like it was my fault for turning mom against them. "You happy now?" he snarled. "Mom won't help anymore because you had to get involved." "Yeah, I am happy," I snapped back. "Because now she won't end up in the hospital again thanks to you and your wife's bullshit." "She wants to help," he shouted. "You're making it harder for everyone." "No, Mike, you're making it harder for everyone," I said. "You and Sarah are lazy as hell and think everyone else should pick up the slack. Mom almost had a fucking stroke because of you two, and you're still acting like the victims. Grow up." He hung up on me after that, but I didn't care. I was done trying to reason with him. If he and Sarah wanted to keep digging their own graves, that was their problem. I wasn't going to lose sleep over it. A few days later, I got a call from my mom. She sounded nervous, which immediately put me on edge. "Ashley, Sarah dropped the kids off again," she said, her voice shaking. I saw red. "What the fuck?" "Mom, you told her you couldn't do it anymore." "I did," she said quietly, "but she just left them here and said she'd be back later." That was it. I'd had enough. I called Sarah, and when she didn't pick up, typical, I left her a voicemail. "You've got 45 minutes to pick up your kids, or I'm calling the fucking cops. And unlike you, I'm not bluffing. Get your shit together." I was shaking with rage when I hung up, but honestly, it felt good to give her a taste of her own medicine. Sarah showed up about 30 minutes later, just like I knew she would. She came storming into my mom's house, yelling about how unreasonable I was being. "You're taking this way too far," she screamed. "You wouldn't actually call the cops on me." "Try me," I said, leaning against the counter with my arms crossed. "You were more than happy to do it to me, so why the fuck shouldn't I?" She kept ranting about how I was blowing things out of proportion, but I didn't engage. I just stared at her until she grabbed her kids and left. My mom looked horrified, but I didn't feel the slightest bit guilty. Someone had to stand up to Sarah, and if my mom couldn't do it, I would. Of course, Mike called me later that night to chew me out. "What the fuck is wrong with you?" he yelled. "You're really threatening to call the cops on us now? You're taking this way too far." "Oh, so now it's a problem when someone threatens to call the cops?" I shot back. "Maybe you should have thought about that when Sarah pulled the same shit on me." "She was upset," Mike protested. "She didn't mean it like that." "Well, now I'm upset. And I do mean it," I said. "You two are a fucking train wreck, and I'm not going to let you drag Mom or me down with you. Figure your shit out." "You're tearing this family apart," he shouted. "No, Mike, you and Sarah are doing that all on your own," I said, and hung up before he could respond. The next week, Sarah tried her usual routine, dropping the kids off at my mom's house without asking. But this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I'd already warned her, so I didn't bother calling. I went straight to the police non-emergency line and reported an abandonment issue. I told them there were 2 kids left with a sick elderly woman who couldn't care for them. When the officers showed up, Sarah was absolutely livid. She stormed into my mom's house while they were still there, screaming about how I was ruining her life. "This is your fault," she yelled at me. "You're destroying my family." "No, Sarah, you're destroying your own family," I said calmly. "You've been dumping your responsibilities on everyone else, and now it's catching up to you." The officers made her take her kids and warned her not to leave them with someone who couldn't care for them. The look on her face was priceless. She wanted to argue, but even she wasn't stupid enough to push it further. After that, Sarah and Mike stopped trying to involve my mom, but the fallout from their mess was just beginning. Sarah was struggling to handle the kids on her own, and Mike was working overtime to make up for her lost income. Their marriage was clearly strained. Mike even started crashing at my mom's house a few nights a week, which only made things more awkward for everyone. My mom was upset, of course. She hated seeing the family fall apart, but I reminded her that this was all Sarah and Mike's doing. "They're reaping what they sowed," I told her. "This isn't your fault, and it's not your job to fix it." She nodded. but I could tell she still felt torn. That's the thing about my mom. She's too kind for her own good. But even she was starting to see that Sarah and Mike were beyond help. After the police visit, Sarah and Mike finally seemed to get the message. They stopped dumping their kids at my mom's house, but the fallout was already in full swing. Sarah was stuck at home, trying to manage her kids 24/7, and let's just say she wasn't handling it well. Mike was working nonstop to cover their bills, and the cracks in their marriage were getting bigger by the day. I wasn't surprised when my mom told me Mike had started crashing at her place some nights. Apparently, he needed space from Sarah because the constant fighting was driving him nuts. My mom tried to play it off like it wasn't a big deal, but I could tell she was worried. She kept saying things like, "I just want everyone to get along," and "family shouldn't be this way." I love my mom, but I couldn't help rolling my eyes. Mom, this isn't about getting along. Sarah and Mike made their bed, and now they're lying in it. This is on them, not us. But Ashley, she said, her voice cracking. What if they can't make it work? What if this breaks their family? I sighed. If their family is falling apart, that's because they refuse to take responsibility for their own lives. You can't keep fixing everything for them. Meanwhile, Sarah started spreading her version of the story to anyone who would listen. According to her, I was the villain who refused to help my own family in their time of need. She left out the part where she called the cops on me, of course. Instead, she painted herself as a struggling mom, just trying to do her best while I selfishly turned my back on them. I started getting calls from extended family members, all parroting Sarah's bullshit. "Why can't you just help them out?" one aunt asked. "It's not like you're doing anything wrong, but you're making their lives so much harder." "Oh, I'm making their lives harder," I snapped. "Did Sarah tell you she called the fucking cops on me? Because that's why we're here." The silence on the other end of the line was always golden. I wasn't about to let her rewrite the narrative and make me out to be the bad guy. The drama hit its peak about a month later when Mike showed up at my mom's house in the middle of the night. He was drunk off his ass and rambling about how he couldn't take it anymore. And yes, before you ask, I'd warned my mom not to let him stay there, but she's too soft-hearted to turn him away. When I found out the next morning, I called him, ready to let him have it. "What the fuck is wrong with you, Mike? Showing up at mom's house like that? She doesn't need this shit." "You don't understand," he slurred, clearly still hungover. "Sarah's driving me crazy. She's always bitching about how hard things are, and I'm the one working my ass off to keep us afloat." "Well, maybe if you two had your shit together, you wouldn't be in this mess," I snapped. "But hey, keep blaming everyone else. That's been working great for you so far." He started yelling, but I hung up before he could finish. I wasn't wasting any more energy on him. The final nail in the coffin came a few weeks later, when Sarah officially quit her job for good. She'd been trying to hold on to a part-time gig, but between the cost of childcare and her inability to manage her kids without help, she gave up. Mike, meanwhile, picked up even more hours at work, but it still wasn't enough. Their bills were piling up, and their savings, if they even had any, were gone. I found out from my mom that they were considering moving back in with Sarah's parents several hours away. "They don't have many options left," she said, sounding genuinely sad. "Good," I said bluntly. "Maybe they'll figure out how to handle their shit without dragging everyone else down with them." She didn't respond, but I could tell she was still holding on to some hope that things would turn around. I didn't share her optimism. People like Sarah and Mike don't change unless they're forced to, and even then, it's a long shot. A few weeks after that, I got a call from Mike. It was short and to the point. "We're moving," he said. "Thanks for nothing, asshole." I couldn't help but laugh. "You're welcome," I said, and hung up. As of now, Sarah and Mike are out of the picture. They moved back in with Sarah's parents, and from what I've heard, their relationship is hanging by a thread. I'd be lying if I said I felt bad for them. They brought this on themselves, and I'm not about to lose sleep over it. My mom is doing better now that she's not babysitting or dealing with their drama. She still talks about how sad it is that the family fell apart, but I remind her that it's not our job to fix people who don't want to be fixed. As for me, I've made my peace with the situation. I don't think my relationship with Mike and Sarah will ever recover, But honestly, I'm okay with that. Some people need to hit rock bottom before they learn anything, and even then they might not change. At the end of the day, I have my own family to take care of, and that's where my focus is. If Sarah and Mike want to keep playing the victim, they can do it without me.